Go love your own enemies. Don't be loving mine. My enemies are the theocratic fascists. I don't love them. I want to destroy them.
You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman.
So you think atheists have it bad now with the few states, there's like eight states in the country where an atheist can't run for office? Here's a little excerpt from Madelyn O'Hare's 1972 speech, and she describes what restrictions existed at that time on atheists.
The only persons exempt from the draft in America are seminarians. We have chaplains in jails, penitentiaries, in the armed forces, on taxpayers' payrolls. And at West Point, the Army still marches the trainees to church on Sunday. Our money since 1865 bears the legend, "One Nation Under God." Our Pledge of Allegiance is corrupted by it. We must acknowledge God to obtain passports. We must acknowledge God since June of 1966, a new law that's just passed. We must acknowledge God in order to work for the federal government, in civil service, or in any other capacity. And Christ is now an official part of the space program. We cannot adopt children if we are atheists. We cannot join the VFW if we are atheists. We cannot join the Masons. We cannot have our children in Scouts unless we believe in God. And this God means a male, white, American, Christian, Judeo-God. The churches are now officially, through a United States Supreme Court decision of last year, absolutely tax exempt in everything they do, real estate, business, and so weiter. And they will soon have their schools completely financed by federal taxpayers. We lost the barricade fight 5 years ago. The Roman Catholic Church will win that hands down. And the only thing that is left in question is, will it be 18 months?
This is a speech I keep coming back to by Madelyn O'Hare, and it's called "Consider the Atheist." And I believe it's a speech that she gave in 1972. I just wanted to put clips from the speech together to some of the better bits of her speech. I think I've done this before with the same speech, but like I said, it keeps coming. I keep going back to it because it's just such a powerful speech.
You know it all. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. At one time in our American history, we had an entire body of men who recognized this. And this entire body of men wrote a constitution for us which embodied several principles. And these principles broke America away from the stream of history and made us particularly and significantly unique as a nation. These men devised a government which was contractual with the people and which established certain unique features, all of which you know: separation of powers, a grant of specific authority to government bodies with a large residue of the power retained by the people, a curious rotating system of in-office placement which would bring about an opportunity for removal from office on a constant and continuing basis, But none of that was any good, because as they played with these ideas, they came to realize that there was a certain decision which had to be made in respect to religion, theism, before they could begin. So as an underlying platform, they programmed in complete and absolute separation of church and state, a phenomena that had never occurred anywhere else in the history of man. They disestablished the church, and as we review it, we can see it was because, actually, they hated Christianity. Indeed, a striking feature of the times was the evasion of the use of the word Christian in respect to the religion embodied in official national declarations. The Constitution of the United States does not contain one word of reference to this religion, which was then the dominant one of each state of the Union. Article 2, Section 8 was written as an escape clause for those who did not care to be identified with the oath-taking of Christianity. The Declaration of Independence refers in ordinary deistic manner to nature and nature's God, creator and divine providence. And concentrated reading of any documents of this entire era brings one to an immediate realization of to what extent the writers would go in order to avoid the mention of the word Christian. And our national leaders were, for the most part, deists, and included in their ranks were the first four presidents of the United States: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Madison. And they include Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, George Mason, Ethan Allen. Thomas Paine's writings on this matter of deism versus the hated Christian religion were so widely known and accepted by the leaders of the revolutionary movement that they were cited in the arguments before the Supreme Court of that day. Indeed, at the Constitutional Convention, when Benjamin Franklin, being aged, attempted to have deliberations open with a prayer, he was defeated by a parliamentarian move. In 1783, when the same Benjamin Franklin came to Congress with the idea that a Catholic bishopric be established in an American city, the Congress repudiated this idea also. And one of the most wealthy men of the time, in dying, endowed a college, Girard College, on the grounds of which he ordered in his will that no religious person should ever set foot on these grounds. Now, you have all heard of the Treaty of Tripoli, for the matter culminated not alone in that, and many atheists try to wash away the Treaty of Tripoli, but it's important. The famous Treaty of Tripoli was concluded by the United States, and treaties are the highest laws of our land. With Tripoli on February 10, 1797, and the treaty was ratified by the Senate in June of the same year. And Article 11 of that treaty states as follows, quote, "As the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the law, religion, or tranquility of Mussulman, and as the states never have entered into any way or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of harmony existing between the two countries." But more important, this treaty was followed with exactly the same wording and the same kind of treaty with Algiers and
so
later
Madelyn
with...
goes on to describe how even though the federal government was very adamantly opposed to Christianity entwining itself, getting its clutches on the government, the state governments were in a different story. And this particular video, Consider the Atheist, she basically blasts the atheists of bygone days for sitting on their thumbs and doing nothing, while the infestation of Christianity took over. We were originally actually the majority. Atheists in this country were the majority, but we did nothing while Christianity just basically took over. So here's another bit she's talking about what atheists let happen. I do have to take an issue with one of the things she says. She talks about Mark Twain's last relative died 6 years earlier, and this was made in this speech was in 1972, so 6 years before 1972. Apparently Mark Twain's, or Samuel Clemens' last relative died. My mother is, Samuel Clemens was my mother's great-great, I don't know if it's great-great or great-great-great uncle. But my mother's great-great-uncle was Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain. So that is not true, because my mother is still alive. So maybe when they're talking about relative, they're talking about immediate family, because, this would be my mom's uncle. That's not really the immediate family, but she is a relative. So anyway, so here's what she says a little bit more about what atheists allowed to happen, which is kind of sad.
And this is the point of all of this. Where were the atheists? In 1780, only 4% of the U.S. population were members of churches. In a population of nearly 3 million by official census, there were only 3,000 churches, and very small ones at that. We began our nation as one being specifically anti-Christian. We were involved federally only as worshipers of nature and nature's God. It was an atheist's dream. And so what did they do? And what did the religious people do? I know what the atheists did. They sat on their asses, and they protected their economic security and their tenure in their employment, and they protected their decent reputation by not aiding the deists at all. But the religious went to work. On October the 27th, 1789, the First Presbytery Eastward in Massachusetts and New Hampshire made an official protest to George Washington because there was no explicit acknowledgement of the only true God and Jesus Christ whom he has sent somewhere in the Magna Carta of our country. And in 1793, the year Philadelphia was stricken by the yellow fever, the Reverend John Mason preached a sermon which extended all over the land, in which he declared that the plague was sent as a visitation from the Christian God because he, Jesus Christ, was not recognized in the supreme law of the land. And at this time, the capital of the United States was situated in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the yellow fever came close to wiping out a very large percentage of the population. In 1803, the Reverend Samuel B. Wiley, Doctor of Divinity, University of Pennsylvania, preached and distributed a sermon in which he said, "Did not the framers of this instrument, the Constitution, resemble the fool mentioned in Psalm 14:1-3, who said in his heart, 'There is no God'?" And in 1811, Samuel Austin, Doctor of Divinity, afterwards president of the University of Vermont, preached and distributed a sermon in which he said that lack of recognition of God was the capital defect in the Constitution, which will issue inevitably in the destruction of the nation. And after the death of George Washington, a prayer was forged to have him utter the only references to Jesus Christ in all of his writings. The original letter from which the prayer was manufactured is found in his writings, and the forgery persists to this day in a bronze tablet in St. Paul's Chapel in New York City. And where were the atheists? It has been important to the Christians of the nation to have at least the founding fathers squarely in the ranks of the Christians rather than the deists, and they have rewritten our history. You won't find this in your college, your university, or your library book. You have to go to the law libraries of America to look up the cases in which these items were involved. And the atheists sat while the Christians redirected our entire nation. The religionists began to make their power felt, and legislators were persuaded to pass laws and statutes making first churches exempt from taxation. However, statutes can be declared unconstitutional, and the churches saw that state constitutional provisions would only protect them in their claim to exemptions. So starting then, they tried to change the constitutions of the various states in order to give themselves tax exemption. Up to 1916, 10 states with constitutions adopted immediately after 1780 had no provisions at all for tax exemptions. But Pennsylvania was the first to adopt a constitutional amendment specifically exempting church property. And you know what vested interests pressured for that. Pennsylvania gave in 1835 and exempted the churches. Massachusetts exempted them in 1836. Virginia in 1841. New Hampshire in 1842. And in the remaining 38 states, 13 more adopted such exemptions between 1859 and 1911. And since 1911, the other states have given way and have given tax exemption across the board. So you see, the very first thing that the churches went after was money, tax money, and power, and absolutely always money other than from their own members. And they asked for the power of sanctions for their beliefs, while the atheists sat and did nothing. An established church is a finance church, and the struggle for disestablishment has always revolved around financial issues. And Justice Douglas, in the case of Murray in 1963 in Maryland, defined an establishment of religion, said that in this kind of configuration, the church typically has a place in the state's budget. So the struggle became apparently one then of re-establishment of the churches, and the religious people moved out while the atheists sat on their ass. Without the recognition that Christianity was a major force in the nation, there could not be a call for indirect subsidy of tax exemption, nor could there be a call for direct subsidy. So it was important to transform us into a Christian nation. And the idea of a Christian amendment soon took hold about the time of the Civil War. And this was introduced into Congress to the Committee of the Judiciary of the House of Representatives first on February the 18th, 1874. I want to read this to you. It's important how far we went from 1776 to 1874, and how far we have come from 1874 to 1971. This is what the religious fanatics tried to do then. They proposed to amend the preamble of the Constitution in this wise: we, the people of the United States, in order to acknowledge Almighty God as the source of all authority and power in civil government, the Lord Jesus Christ as the ruler among the nations, and his will revealed in the Holy Scriptures as the supreme authority, in order to constitute a Christian government, form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Don't laugh, it almost passed. And this stupid amendment was reintroduced 6 times since then. In 1896, 1897, 1898, 1899, 1900, 1901, and don't you know I'm finding it in America today. There may be another attempt to pass it. The religionists take a long view of history, and the atheists sit on their asses with the notion that religion will someday die a convenient death. Someday the Pope's going to call me up, and he's going to say, "Hey, Madelyn, this is Paul here. I want you to know that I want you to take us over. If you'll just come over to Rome here, fly over, we'll give you our political power, our banks, our businesses, our real estate." What's the matter with you people? You think they're going to give up? So what have we now as a nation? This nation that we started out with, like this, in 1776, listen what we have now. In a nation started with such auspicious courage, the atheists during this time permitted the abuse of Thomas Paine. They permitted the destruction of the works of Ethan Allen, the single anti-Christian voice among the revolutionaries who fought really. They failed to rally under Ingersoll. They permitted Eugene V. Debs to languish in prison. They never even made a memorial out of Clarence Darrow's home. Nobody knows that Thomas Alva Edison was an atheist. Nobody knows that Mark Twain was. Oh, Mark Twain was a brave one. He was one of you. He said, 100 years after my last relative dies, you can publish my work on atheism. The last relative died 6 years ago.
Such a courageous woman. I just have nothing but respect for her. She was ahead of her time. She was an anti-theist. She had a lot of fire in the belly. She didn't just... she had a lot of contempt for atheists, as you can hear in her voice. She was an atheist, but she was an anti-theist too. And you see it on YouTube. I get it all the time. Well, you're just as bad as they are, Diane. You're just as bad as they are, you know. You let them have their beliefs. They have a right to be, you know, if it makes them happy, then just fine, let them whatever. This guy, this nihilist who wrote me and said, you know, well, what you're doing isn't working, you know, and it's time that we fight. He basically has this, we need to do something more than what we're doing. Kind of misguided, dangerous opinions I got mostly from him, but it left me with one very clear, yeah, he's right about one thing. We do need to do something. We can't just keep, you know, this apathetic tolerance that we have. I've said it in many videos before that we need to up the ante. Churches are coming to YouTube and using YouTube as a tool to get converts. I don't know, in the time that I've been making videos, I've noticed a much more prevalent presence of Christians on YouTube and posting on my channel and elsewhere. I feel like we need to do more. The Freedom from Religion Foundation and organizations like it, you know, that's definitely a step in the right direction, but we need to take back our country. We need to do more. What Madelyn is saying, that the atheists did not help the deists. There were so many atheists back in the day. We were the majority, and we sat back and let all this happen. There weren't enough anti-theists. There weren't enough people to protest, to say, no, sorry, that isn't what our founding fathers wanted. It goes against what America's about. The Christian cult did what it always does. It created fear. There was some kind of plague, and they turned around and said, "Oh, this is God." You know, it's because we don't have Jesus Christ in any of our in our Constitution or our Declaration or whatever. We don't have the name Jesus Christ. We don't have the Christian God in our government. Blah blah blah. They used that. They used fear to manipulate and get their way. I'm sorry, but, and this is something else this nihilist said, restrictions have been built up that now confine us. Restrictions put up by these cults that now confine us, that we now are basically enslaved by these restrictions. Like the fact that in 8 states, or 7 or 8 states in this country, atheists cannot run for office. That's one of them. Restrictions that, I consider the restrictions that are continuously trying to hamstring women and keep women from being able to have control over their own body, which brings to mind another thing I heard her say that I wanted to share. So hang on a second.
The atheists have been sitting on their asses, doing nothing. We as citizens and taxpayers support not only churches, church lands, church schools, tuition for church children. We support church businesses, which are tax-free, church stock ownership, which is tax-free, and church control of our culture. Ask any woman who wants an abortion. The greatest insult of all is the control of our culture. But, well, after all, I'm only talking about trifling matters. I'm only talking about symbols. And the money that I talk about is a trifle. It's meaningless. What the hell? The Southern Baptist Convention only owns, just merely, Borden Milk, Bemis Bags, Mack Truck, Huttrig, Rath Meat, Fruhoff Trailers, Burlington Mills, Firestone Rubber. They're a small congregation. They couldn't own more. The direct and indirect tax subsidies of the churches by federal, state, county, and city government only exceeds the cost of the war in Vietnam by $4.5 million a year. I'll repeat that. The direct and indirect tax subsidization of the churches by federal, state, county, and city governments only exceeds the cost of the war in Vietnam by $4.5 million a year. It's really nothing. Don't be concerned. Meanwhile, there are more atheists in America than there are Roman Catholics. And they watch the Negroes, they watch those poor blacks striving for ethnic pride. They watch the saved blacks as the blacks struggle for the concept of black is beautiful, for identity. They struggle to ameliorate their civil conditions. And the atheists see the American Indians and the Chicanos and women in women's lib struggling in the battle everywhere for human rights. And the sophisticated, intelligent, educated atheist, who is the doctor, the lawyer, the teacher, the judge, the person in actual control of our society because of his functions in it. The sophisticated, intelligent, educated atheist sits on his ass and won't even do what the lowly black man in the gutter will do. Atheism, the religion of the future? Ha! Don't make me laugh. The average churchgoer today is age 32. He has a master's degree from college. He sends his 2 children to Sunday school regularly. His wife goes 1 day a week extra for some proselytizing church activity, and he is an atheist. Atheists are faceless, gutless, and brainless, and they cannot inherit the future. They isolate themselves from the fight, and there is a fight, and it is in society, not in esoteric groups hidden under meaningless names. My God, the ethical culture society. I mean, who could tell what they stood for? disdaining to get their hands dirty. And it's a war. It's a war in which we need to reach the mass of people with the sophisticated instruments of mass communication and with some ideas, not in little groups such as this, nor through little unintelligible magazines or through irrelevant issues, as we strive to be identified as everything that we can be identified as except an atheist. Well, I'm an atheist and take a goddamn good look. 180 pounds on the hoof, and I'm proud of it. And as an atheist, I have an understanding that many of you do not have. I cannot take on all of the problems of the entire world piecemeal, the superstructure of our culture, for I have a more important job than that. I work only on the basic philosophy, the floor on which everything else sits. And in a geopolitical sense, and in a long-range view of 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years in the stream of human history from this date forward, that's the important thing. That floor, that base. But this is too big of an idea for the small minds of the atheists of America to encompass. Their interests are not in bettering the quality of human life. Their interest is not in defining this floor, this base, this magnificent life-asserting philosophy. The atheists are interested in job tenure. The atheists are interested in saving their economic asses. The atheists are interested in the pettiness of fear of being known as an atheist. I can't tell my wife. You can do something else to her, really. The atheists are interested in respectability. They are interested in their quiet, outward conformity to the notion of religion, through which conformity they give it support. Religion continues because you support it, every one of you here, and you support it by your conformity with its notions and with your compliances with its demands upon you. And the geometric progression now of religious gains, don't kid yourself when you look at the culture. Religion gains. The gains were in arithmetic progression for some decades. They're in geometric progressions now. And I think unless we have a significant breakthrough in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to fight 1776 all over again in 1976. The First Amendment will mean little or nothing by then. But separation of church and state, the only protection for the atheist or for free man and a free society, is meaningless and worthless as far as the atheist is concerned. He would sell out his soul if he had one. He would sell out his country. He would sell out his family. He would easily sell out the entire human race, and he is doing it today in America for job security and for respectability, and not to be labeled with the horrendous name of atheist. I need, therefore, to end it as I began it. I was asked to speak tonight on the question, is atheism the religion of the future? No, it's not. Religion will revitalize, and it will come out stronger from its period of strife, because it has no enemy. The atheist is gutless. Thank you.